girls that have missed out on today's webinar, so their loss. Okay, so I'm going to get started on, okay, let me just, cool. Is this working? Okay. Alrighty, so let me screen share. I'm going to screen share the desktop actually, I think. Looks really bizarre. Okay, maybe not. Hang on. Screen cap. Okay, so if we actually have questions, I might have to wait till the end to get your questions. Okay, so we're going to be talking today about conflict and also advocacy, in particular the ladder of inference. So I'm just going to show a video with you that's actually quite funny. And it's decided not to work today. That's good. All right, so I'm going to go to the next slide. I don't know why it hasn't worked. So today I want you to think about conflict. So remember how I spoke to you in the Empower program, and I'd said to you that in terms of the power of the female brain, that we've got areas of the female brain that actually are not that comfortable with conflict. We tend to resist conflict. And I want you to, if you want, write these down or have a think about them in terms of what conflict means to you. How do you feel when you can't resolve a conflict? And how do you feel you can resolve a conflict? So when you're actually going through this workshop or this webinar, I want you to think about those questions around, think about what conflict means to you, how do you feel when you can't resolve a conflict, and how do you feel when you can resolve a conflict? Because, I mean, conflict, I think, happens all the time. I mean, with our family, with our children, at work. I mean, conflict's pretty much part of everyday life, and some of us can deal with conflict really effectively, some of us can't. I mean, I know now, being in my 40s, I'm a lot more effective at dealing with conflict now, or and having those courageous conversations than I would have been in my 20s and 30s, because the lens that I'm seeing conflict in is that it's actually one of those things that can be really actually quite empowering and necessary in terms of in learning and influencing, and also understanding other people's point of views, and we're going to talk about advocacy and inquiry a little bit later on. So everything that I'm sharing with you today is in your handouts. I'm hoping that this video works. No, it doesn't. I don't know why it's not working, because they're actually on my computer, so maybe Webinar Jam isn't working today. So I really apologise about that. I'll send you the videos when I actually get off the webinar. So everyone actually did their conflict handling styles questionnaire. So your scores on the questionnaire indicate your most characteristic and least characteristic styles in handling conflict. So in any conflict situation, your behaviour can be described against those two dimensions. So whether it's assertiveness, which also relates to advocacy, so concern for personal goals, so the extent to which you attempt to satisfy your own wishes, versus cooperativeness, so that's the inquiry, concern for relationships, so to the extent to which you attempt to satisfy the other person's concerns. So overall, there's actually 5 major styles. I don't know if any of you have actually encountered these different styles before, in terms of, you know, the collaborating, competing, avoiding, accommodating and compromising style of management. Now, remember that no particular style is superior in or of itself. How effective they are depends on, in terms of the context in which they're used. And another important thing is to remember that that the style used in any particular conflict also depends in part on the style adapted by those with whom you have in conflict. So sometimes you do have to adjust your style depending on the particular style of the person that you're actually having the conversational conflict with as well. So I'm just going to kind of go through each of them. So it'll be really interesting if you're happy to share on the chat box a little bit later. Unfortunately, I can't see it at the moment because I'm in the slide viewer show of my PowerPoint, but it kind of gives you an indication of where you sit in terms of that, again, advocacy, like concern for personal goals versus concern for relationships, which is inquiry. So the first one I'm going to talk to you about is the collaborator. Now, the collaborator is the owl. The collaborator is that style around I win, you win. The next one is the competitor. So the competitor. So the competitor is the shark. I win, you lose. And it's always good to actually put a kind of, when you visualize these things, to put a little animal against it. I don't know why they chose an owl. They, you know, I could see why they chose a shark for competitor. But it's always good to kind of see yourself in that light. Avoider, and I know plenty of people that are avoiders. They kind of put their head in the sand and don't want to deal with conflict. Is that I zig, you zag. So that's that turtle. The next one's accommodator, which is the teddy bear, which I think's, you know, lovely little teddy bear as the accommodator. It's that very cooperative style. You have a real concern for relationships, so it's that I lose, you win. And the last one, which is kind of in the middle, is the compromiser. You bend and I bend, which is the fox. So we're going to go through each of the different styles. Okay, so the collaborator. I win, you win. So, yeah, it'd be really interesting to see what style you came up with. So this style is both an assertive and cooperative approach. It involves an attempt to work with the other person to find a solution which meets the needs of both parties without sacrifice by either. So each party has a concern for both their own goals as well as those of the other person, and also their working relationship. So it's frequently used when both parties have important goals which are too critical to be compromised, need to merge experiences and feelings from people with different background and perspectives, have to gain a common commitment from all parties, to gain a better understanding of others' views, and to get to the cause which may be impediment, I shouldn't have said that other word, in the working relationship of both parties at the same time. So owls are like, this is the owl, they're not actually satisfied until a solution is found, you know, that achieves their goals and the other person's goals. So interesting to see who is the owl. The next one is the competitor. I win, you lose. So it's interesting in terms of this conflict style, and as you know, when I mentioned during the program that I actually work with a lot of leaders in the construction engineering space, they tend to have this style, that really quite assertive style. This is an assertive and non-cooperative approach. You know, this is a struggle for dominance. An individual's pursuit of their own goals at another's expense with little regard for their personal relationship. So it's frequently used, particularly in an emergency when quick, decisive action is needed, in implementing unpopular course of action, in situations where the person is convinced they are right, where the other methods have been tried and failed, where there's an atmosphere of low trust, and to protect oneself against others who tend to take advantage of non-competitive individuals. So I mean, the pros of this style are definitely around they're goal orientated and it's quick, but it also may breed hostility as well. And I tend to find like environments where I've worked with this style of leader that really does focus on I win, you lose. It gets to a point where their teams they actually shut themselves down, and they don't find the leader approachable. It can really stifle innovation as well, and having people that are solutions focused, because I found that in terms of even if they disagree with the leader, they actually don't say anything, because the leader is quite assertive / aggressive. So, I mean, I can see where this style could actually have benefits, but also could actually have some cons as well. The next one, in terms of its, low in terms of non-assertive and not cooperative, is I zig, you zag. So an avoider is neither assertive or cooperative. So basically a passive approach, involves sidestepping, postponing, delaying or withdrawing from a threatening issue. So it's frequently used when the issue is a minor one, where there is little chance of winning, to give both parties a chance to cool off, when additional time is desirable, when others can resolve the conflict more effectively, and when the negative impact of the conflict might be too damaging or costly to both parties. So, I mean, there's definitely some pros in this as well. It doesn't escalate conflict, postpones difficulty, but the cons of it are that unaddressed problems, unresolved problems, and problems and conflict could actually start to build up as well. And again, I've used this style where I felt where I've had a situation where I've kind of gone, okay, what can I do about the situation? I've got 3 choices. I can improve the situation, I can try and change the situation, or I actually have to remove myself from the situation. And sometimes I've just thought to myself, in terms of being brain friendly, I need to actually just remove myself from the situation. There's no point in getting in the conflict with the person, because it's just going to be, not probably in a lose-lose situation, or I felt that it was just going to create unnecessary drama, and I've just decided to distance myself from it, from a stress and also from a health perspective as well. The next one is the accommodator. This is the teddy bear. So this is I win, you lose. So this is in terms of, the accommodator is the opposite of competing. So it's a non-assertive, cooperative approach. An individual is willing to forego their own goals to satisfy the goals of another and to protect their own personal relationships. So it often takes the form of charity, generosity, yielding to another person's point of view. Okay, so it's frequently used, this style, when an individual realises that they are wrong. Okay, and I actually think that's important in terms of any sort of leadership role, to actually say to someone, you know what, I've made a mistake, or I was in the wrong there. I think that takes a lot of courage and vulnerability. So I think, but don't say it if you feel that you're actually not wrong. I mean, if you feel that you actually have a point of view and you are right, it can be just as damaging for the mind to say, okay, I'm wrong, when you actually do have something important, or it is your point of view. To encourage others to express their viewpoint, to indicate a degree of reasonableness, and also a goodwill gesture when the issue is of greater importance to the other person. So to preserve harmony in the working relationship, and to build up brownie points also, to use for later time. So some leaders will kind of go, okay, I'm willing to forego that and kind of step back and go, okay, I've lost this time, but you've kind of building up in your mind those brownie points. So when there's another, maybe there's a failure, or there's no, it's not a failure, a favour that you need from the other person, or you're trying to influence the other person at a later time, you can kind of go, oh, but remember when I actually, said you win in that situation, or yeah, you could have had that, blah, blah, blah. How about my turn now? So, it can be used as a bit of an influencer. So, I mean, there's pros to it. It minimises injury. when we're outmatched, relationships are also maintained. But also it can breed resentment, and it can look as though like you're being exploited if you are an accommodator. The next one is the bucks, is you bend, I bend. Okay, so this one involves a degree of both assertion and cooperation. The individual is concerned with their own goals as well as the maintenance of the working relationship. So the objective is to find expedient, mutually acceptable solution which partially satisfies both parties. So it's frequently used when parties have equal power and are strongly committed to mutually exclusive goals, and when neither party has sufficient power to force the other party to comply. So to achieve like temporary settlements and complex matters, to reach a solution under difficult circumstances, or under time pressures as well. And when a goal achievement is important, but the relationship must be preserved. So in terms of that one there, it's useful in complex issues without simple solutions. So in terms of all parties are equal in power, no one is really satisfied. That's a con with this one. So it's less optimal solutions get implemented if you think about it that way. So it would have been really interesting to hear your scores in terms of these different areas that you'll have, like the style that you particularly use and the one that you don't use very often. So if you get a chance, I would love to hear your particular style. So actually conflict can also be seen, like I actually like to see it this way, it's how you actually frame these things I think is important. And there's actually, in terms of your handouts, there's some more information and tips around the different styles, but conflict within a team situation can lead to greater understanding and creativity. If it doesn't threaten or stifle the members of the team, I always think that it's important with conflict, especially in a organisational team, is to focus on the team and the actual work and the role, not the person. So don't make conflict a personal thing. Just focus it on in terms of the actual work, or the work that needs to be done and the role, not actual the person itself. Okay. Just an interesting little quote there. So anyone can become angry, that is easy, but to be angry at the right time, to the right degree, to be angry with the right person to the right degree at the right time for the right purpose and in the right way, that's not always easy. So I would actually welcome you to do the questionnaire with your teams. Could do it as a bit of a team building, or a bit of a team building workshop, even at the start of a meeting, just to get an understanding of everyone's different styles. So if you are working with someone that is a shark, and you're working and you've got someone in the team that might be an accommodator, and you know that the shark and accommodator are spending a lot of time communicating, and that they understand the different style that they have, they might be able to adjust their style knowing that they're kind of at the opposite ends of the spectrum. Okay, so I'm now going to talk about the RAS and also Paris. What does that say when you read that? Okay, it says Paris in the spring, but it's interesting when I actually show that slide, most people say Paris in the spring. And the reason being is I'm going to talk about the RAS a little bit. So remember when we spoke about in the workshop, and I know this slide's a little bit hard to read, we spoke in the workshop about, you know how you're looking at buying a new car, and then all of a sudden you've got in your brain that you want to buy a red BMW convertible, and then all of a sudden you're seeing red convertible BMWs everywhere. That's your RAS working. So the RAS actually plays an important function in the human body as well, in terms of it really kind of controls our consciousness, what we're actually paying attention to, but it also helps with our breathing, our sleeping, also the beating of our heart, and also behavioural motivation. So there's lots of many things that we do in our daily lives that may or may not need consideration, and the RAS actually senses the things around us and characterizes them and sort of says, okay, this is important, this is important, this is important, sorry, and this is important. And the actual speed of consciousness thought is about 1/12 of a second. So the RAS is constantly like working overload, and that's through, you know, obviously through sight and also through what we're hearing. So it plays a really important function in terms of focusing on what information we want to be focusing on and what is actually useless information. So it really helps in fulfilling goals and also directs concentration towards a goal by acting as a filter to remove any unnecessary information. So if you think about the amount of information that's actually going into our brain, the RAS is kind of helping us focus on what's useful and what isn't useful. And the brain actually is constantly pushing all this information back into our long-term memory. So whatever we whatever we put our focus to gets pushed back, it gets hardwired. So if you're constantly thinking about that BMW convertible, the RAS is always on the lookout for that information. So and from there it has that response type as well around whether it's going to be flight or fight for us as well. So, you know, it plays an important part of accessing information and, you know, whether the information is going to be a threat or also whether it's going to be a reward. So if you think about this, and normally when I'm in a workshop, it's really interesting listening to everybody read this, but I want you to spend a few minutes reading this in your mind. So I'll say it out loud. So according to research at an English university, it doesn't matter in what order the letters in a word are, the only important thing is that the first and last letter are in the right place. The rest can be a total mess. And you can still read it without a problem. This is because we do not read every letter by itself, but the word as a whole. So when I showed you that slide before with the Paris in the spring, you only need a couple of bits of information. The RAS only needs a couple of bits of information to kind of make a judgment, you know, to actually go, because it's working so quickly, it's like bang, 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 you know, 1/12 of a second. Because we're actually accessing so much information, it's actually pulling, you know, what we've actually pushed back into the long-term memory into how we make decisions and how we process things. So that's why we only, here when we're reading this, we only need a few bits of information to kind of make a judgment or kind of make a perception of what's going on. So it's pretty interesting, the RAS. It's a really important part of our brain, like all the elements of our brain, but it's a fundamental part of our brain in terms of, you know, how we access information. So I'm going to talk to you now about, in terms of how that relates to advocacy inquiry and how we actually, in terms of the RAS, can make assumptions about things only based on a little bit of data. Now, I use this model a lot, and there's a really good video that I'll send you all around this. And Chris Argis, who actually developed this model, said that we tend to behave in terms of jumping to conclusions. And if you kind of reflect on that, and I'm sure there have been plenty of times, I'm putting my hand up for this, that I have jumped to so many conclusions. I think I might have mentioned in the workshop about, I was speaking to a group of lawyers, and I was talking about the hippocampus and how we have a larger hippocampus, women have a larger hippocampus, so we're storing a lot more, you know, long-term memories. And this woman said to me, that rings so true. I'm constantly walking down the hall, or I'm constantly seeing people talking in the corridor, and I immediately assume they're talking about me because my memory bank is processing this information that every time I see people talking and looking at me, they're automatically talking about me. She's definitely using the ladder of inference in terms of she's picked up a couple of pieces of data which has gone straight to her RAS. Her RAS has seen something, gone, two people talking. My long-term memory is saying they're probably talking about me, and my RAS is basically saying to my brain, I've only needed to have a look at a couple of pieces of data. I've gone up the ladder of influence in terms of my beliefs around when I see two people talking, that means they're talking about me, so I'm making an assumption they're talking about me. But I'm going to show you by actually going down the ladder of influence, by actually checking, actually spending some more time around advocacy and inquiry, they're probably not talking about her if she really tested the data. So one can leverage, you know, and this really helps with conflict as well. One can gain leverage of improving conversations by paying attention to advocacy and inquiry. So this is where advocacy and inquiry play a really important role. So advocacy is about basically, it's about making statements, saying what you think, giving your point of view, okay? And inquiry is about asking questions in order to understand another person's point of view. So I'm going to talk about the different levels, and this really does also overlap with the model I showed you before around the conflict and the teddy bear and the shark and everything. You've got a number of different areas in terms of how you can use this model. So if you think about if you're someone that's actually high in advocacy, so remember I spoke to you about advocacy is about making statements, saying what you think and giving your point of view, and I'm sure we've worked with lots of people who have got very high advocacy skills, okay, and they're not so much around asking questions but more posing their point of view, so it tends to be more one-way communication, even if both people are doing it. It's actually useful for giving information, but doesn't necessarily lead to exploring different points of view or agreeing to or building commitment. So, you know, one of the things that it can be actually really useful for is explaining, but it also could be, you know, not so useful because it can appear as though like you're imposing. So when someone has this sort of style, and I've worked with plenty of leaders that do in terms of quite happy to explain, quite happy to kind of explain, but they're not really asking you a lot of questions to kind of get some more data from you. You tend to find that they impose their views on others, and this can also create compliance and resistance as well. Okay, the next one is someone that's got low advocacy and high inquiry. So again, it's one-way communication in a different sense. So the speaker doesn't state their views. Useful as a way of finding out information, but can create difficulty when the speaker has a hidden agenda or is using the questions to get the other person to discover what the speaker already thinks is right. Again, you can use these different situations in different times. I've used this in terms of, you know, some of the work that I do, especially if you know, in some of my consulting work, I've actually, you know, been very high in my inquiry in terms of getting to understand other people's point of view and, you know, finding out more information and things like that, and haven't really spent a lot of time making many statements. But again, it's just another way of looking at it. So it can come across, if you actually use it too much, that you're interrogating. So you could use it in interviewing, but if you're using it too much, the person might feel a little bit like, hang on a second, why are you asking me so many questions? Are you interrogating me? The next one is low advocacy and low inquiry. So this is also one way. You're just sort of basically observing. You're not really making any statements, and you're really not making, you know, asking many questions. People watch but contribute little. It's okay when being an observer is useful. Funnily enough, this week I'm coaching a leader who this is very much him, and he said this is a real issue with him, that I wouldn't say he's an introvert, but he doesn't like conflict at all, and he's trying to move up in terms of his career within the organisation, and he's got feedback that he's very much, they feel that he just observes, and that their perception of him is he's actually withdrawing because he doesn't actually ask questions, he doesn't make statements, and he just sits in a lot of different forums and meetings, and they feel he doesn't really contribute, and he wants to contribute. And so part of my work is to try and get him out of that square where he is developing skills around inquiry and advocacy. So it can create difficulty when people withhold their views on key issues, and cover this up by staying on safe subjects as well. And it also can come across, again, and this is just around perception, that you're not actually engaged. So yeah, it's interesting how different people handle different situations. And the last one is high advocacy and high inquiry. So this approach fosters two-way communication and learning. So therefore, I state my views, but also encourage you to inquire into my views, and I invite you to state your views, and I inquire into your views. So remember when I spoke about the brain and, you know, how we process information, and how we're all seeing things through our lens, and there's not two brains alike in this whole world. We've all got different brains. You know, I remember being in a workshop when I do anything around change or the neuroscience of change. One of the things I say to the group is, when you think of the colour red, what words come to mind? And rarely do I get a group, and I might have a group of 15 people in there, when I say, when you think of the colour red, what's the first thing that comes into your brain? I rarely get two people in the room, funnily enough, when you think about the colour red, that actually say the same thing. They all say something completely different. So everyone's actually seeing that colour red through their own lens. But we make assumptions that every brain is the same as our brain. So everyone should be seeing the world like we're seeing the world. So when we're actually making statements, we just assume that, well, hang on, shouldn't you be thinking the exact same thing that I'm thinking? And that's why I think, in terms of having that high quality advocacy and inquiry, you can't make those assumptions. You actually need to test the data. So by actually using some of the techniques in advocacy and inquiry, it can actually help you have difficult conversations in a way that results in a deeper understanding for both parties. So it enables you to really talk to someone. So there's some really interesting steps, and I actually, if you ever get a chance to, and I would love for you to actually take these handouts or even try some of this information within your team workshops and actually have discussions with your teams. I've actually done role plays around this, and it just works a treat, because this is actually a really nice process. So you can actually, when you're talking to someone, and say, when I see, and DOD means direct observable data. So you're actually saying to someone, when I actually see you doing this, okay, when I see you in a meeting, for instance, that leader that sits in meetings and he says nothing, so he's sitting there and he's actually got low inquiry and low advocacy. He's actually not making any statements, and he's not asking any questions. So if I was his manager and I was getting frustrated with him in a meeting, I might take him out of the meeting, and instead of making an assumption about what's going on and thinking in my brain, okay, he's actually not saying anything, so in my brain I'm making an assumption that he's not interested or he's not engaged, and therefore I'm going to make an assumption that if he's not interested and he's not engaged, he might be looking for another job. I might have to start thinking about finding a replacement for him if he's not engaged. Thing is, that's not what's going on for him. So I would probably need to take him outside the room after the meeting and go, Martin, when I see you sitting in the meeting, which is direct observable data, when I see you sitting in the meeting and not actually saying anything or contributing, I think this means that you're not engaged. My concern is that if you're not engaged, is there anything that I can do to help you with that? Is there something going on with work? And tell me what this is, and tell the person what you're experiencing. So when I'm actually seeing you do that, this is what I'm experiencing. I'm feeling frustrated. I'm feeling a little bit annoyed that you know, you're not contributing. Can you please tell me what's going on? And Martin could turn around and say, well, actually, I'm working with a coach because I find being in a forum with a team of people that are my peers, you know, I get a little bit anxious, and some of the conversations are, you know, quite courageous conversations. I don't know how to deal with that, so I go into my shell. You know, I become a little bit of the turtle. You know, I'm avoiding. I don't want to get involved with the conversation or the conflict. It's not that I'm not engaged. It's just that I don't know how to actually make a statement, or I don't know how to actually ask a question. So therefore, as the manager, I'd say to Martin, oh, okay, I've got it completely wrong. Here I am thinking in my brain that you're not engaged, but actually it's because you don't have the tools or the skills to do this. So it's about, again, me using both advocacy and inquiry, making some statements, but also about, you know, what I think it means and what I'm experiencing, but actually inquiring and saying, tell me what's going on. Like, tell me, you know, what's going on. So Google it. I know this isn't the best picture, but it basically, you know, when I talked to you about before about the RAS, we tend to look at data. Our RAS goes, bang, that's the information. I'm going back into my long-term memory. This is what I think it means. So that's where I'm going to make an assumption based on those beliefs on my long-term memory. And I'm actually not going to inquire, and I'm not going to make any statements. I'm just going to basically believe what my beliefs and assumptions are, right? So it's about, you know, you're going up the ladder of inference. You're going, okay, I observe the data. I observe the occurrence, which you can see down here. I select, filter, or position that data I observe. I make assumptions on the things I know and meanings I add to it based on my world, based on my experience. Okay, and again, it's only through your lens that you're actually going up this ladder. Then I start to draw a conclusion. So like, for instance, my example, Martin's not engaged. That's the conclusion I make. I refine and update my beliefs around the world, and therefore I start to see Martin in a different light. Okay, he's not engaged. My belief is now, I don't think he's going to be a great manager, and also I don't know if he's right for the job now. Maybe I should look for someone else. So I'm going to start taking actions based on that belief. But it's about that reflective loop. Our beliefs affect the data we select and see in the future. So it's about going back down the ladder and going, hang on, I don't want to jump to conclusions. I don't want to make assumptions. I actually want to have a conversation around the data that I'm actually seeing and using high quality advocacy and inquiry. So if you want any questions that you can ask around this, I'm more than happy to send you some questions to help you facilitate really useful questioning around advocacy and inquiry and around this ladder of inference. Okay, so insights. I know I've kind of given you a lot of information there. I'm just going to go back to, okay, back to the chat. Has anyone got any questions around that? And there's also in the back of your handout some really great general guidelines for productive conversations as well around, you know, looking at your frame of mind, and also some other tips around advocacy and inquiry as well. So any questions? No? If you do have any questions, just email me tonight. I'm more than happy to share the information with you. Okay, thanks for your time tonight, guys. Unfortunately, I can't see any questions, so I'm hoping that there isn't. I might just open up Q&A just in case. All right, well, have a great night. Thanks for tonight. Okay, bye.